So definitely some great questions that we should talk about on the break. So I know, Paula, we can chat about the content marketing score and how that's calculated, and definitely can share some other examples on both a global product launch and what you were talking about, because the link backs and everything, very, very powerful to source a blog post on LinkedIn, but then also have it on your own native blog. I personally just did that when we released our IT research, had one on a LinkedIn blog, posted it myself separately, and that drove a lot of increased visits, which is great for us. But I want to transition very quickly to the next speaker. So I'd like to invite Josh Reynolds to the stage, who is a friend and a colleague that I've heard him give a version of this presentation before, and I was extremely interested in getting him to come in and talk to you guys today, because the idea of authentic storytelling is so perfect for what our research around the IT committee has told us. So I'd love to have Josh come up and tell his story.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'd better be good. For the next half hour, I want to explore the concept of creative destruction, which is a thing. It's on Investopedia. I checked it out. Creative destruction, blowing up stuff that isn't helpful. One of the most inspiring things about listening to Sal talk this morning was how much cool stuff he blew up before he started co-creating stuff. And by the way, that's the second concept I want to talk about today, is co-creation. What is, again, so inspiring to me about Khan Academy is they don't dictate the education process. They co-create it with the students. Why doesn't the same thing apply to marketing and storytelling? Why don't we blow up what's not helpful? And why don't we actually co-create that story with our audience? If you can do it for that very inspiring young lady in Mongolia, surely we can pull it off here. It's my practice to always assume that I'm going to get bumped from the speaker list because I'm the least known. So I like to have my presentations boil down to one slide. This is that slide. If I could just pop a flash memory card in your brain, we can just be done with it and go get some food. But we're not there yet. There are, again, two core concepts. What gets in the way? It's usually ourselves, right? It's usually the fact that we're either locked into old processes, or we're trying to follow best practices, or we're using the terms that everyone else is using. And isn't it interesting that leadership trended as the #1 LinkedIn topic, I think it was both January and February of this year. Okay, that's a bit of a double-edged sword. It means that leadership is important. It also means that we are drawing and quartering the definition of leadership into so many different directions, there might not be much left of it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the bastardization of leadership and how to avoid it. Second thing that gets in the way are superlatives. All the ests that are out there, the winningest, bestest, wonderfulest, most innovativest. And the superlatives are not always all that helpful. So where does hype and hyperbole get in the way, and how do you get around that? And the other thing we're going to blow up is this concept that I like to refer to as corporate narcissism. There is a large body of fascinating and somewhat amusing content on that concept online. I'm not going to tell you which search engine to use. I will tell you to explore it, and there's some cool stuff there. It's not all about us. And we've heard that as a consistent theme. The very foundation of the Khan Academy was amazingly unself-interested. And it's core to everything else we do. What do you stand for? So then once we blow some things up, we're going to go into what unlocks the potential. And I'd like to share with you one model. I'm not going to say bestest or most innovativist, but a pretty good model for compelling narratives. We call it viral storytelling. And like many other storytelling models that are floating around out there, it is based on the hero's journey, which is the bestest story model. And we're also going to talk about the use of viral questions, provocative, open-ended inquiry that leads to learning. We heard that that was one of the keys from Sal this morning, open-ended inquiry. Genuinely powerful, open-ended questions that are not, wouldn't you like to buy my product? That are perhaps a little bit more open-ended than that even. And lastly, I'm going to get a little preachy on you, but that's just because that's how I am, about being in service of something bigger than yourself. We all felt palpably, I think, the power of that while Sal was speaking. Being in service of something bigger than yourself. I don't know about you all, but can I see a show of hands? I'm just curious. How many of you were struck with the humility of that guy? Was it about him? You know, I think I probably am a really arrogant, self-centered guy, and I haven't done a fraction of what that guy's done. He was in service. He is in service of something bigger than himself. That draws people to you. That draws talent to you. That draws customers to you. That draws corporate valuation to you. But it's not because you're after those things. You're in service of something. I'm going to close on what that means for storytelling. And then, because I know this group is also, as Catherine alluded to, into data points, I'm going to show you where the evidence exists for this. In case I am preaching to the choir, then let me preach to the preachers. I'm going to hand you some free research that cost us a little bit. I'm going to hand you some free research that lets you go out and preach this message to the folks that need to hear it in your life. So, before we go any farther on this, though, the foundation of everything is authenticity. For those of us that are in brand marketing and brand storytelling, we seem to forget what brand means. One of the original uses of the term brand was a red-hot twisted piece of metal that you seared into the side of living flesh because you were making a commitment to something. You put it on your cows so people knew who to blame when they ate my grass. Or, in the case of Yank Saint or Yantra tattooing, you believed so much in something bigger than yourself that you would sit there while tap, 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 tap. A Thai Buddhist monk would put into your skin the symbols that mattered. That's brand. And in the case of Yantra tattooing, the Thai Buddhist belief is that these things actually are expressions of what you believe and who you are. And they're not taking aspirin before this happens, by the way. They do it for tourists, and I think they might serve something to the tourists. But for the most part, branding should be a little uncomfortable because it is a commitment. And it is an expression of what you believe. And in this tradition, that smiling man right there actually believes that he's got now gifts, talents, power that came from making that commitment through brand. I just want to put it to you that we can all serve a higher purpose by actually standing for something that means something. And when you ask yourselves, for whatever organization you're working for, why does the world need that organization? You might find yourself in possession of something more powerful than just a logo. You might find yourself in possession of a purpose. I want to just ground everything we're doing in this concept of authenticity, and it'll play out over the next few concepts. But first, let's blow some stuff up. Leadership is center square on buzzword bingo in marketing. We all know the words that are there: end-to-end, turnkey, industries leading, world leading. It is perhaps one of the most overused words in all of marketing, which is a shame because right now I think the world needs leadership more than ever before. It needs authentic leadership. So let's look at the vectors of leadership, and let's look at what's at risk for being lost as we pull this thing in too many different directions. Different vectors of leadership: market leadership, thought leadership, technology leadership, team leadership, things we need. But we throw the word leader into our marketing communications, into our storytelling, like it was just a comma. It's everywhere, and it's not always helpful unless it means something. Let's take a little bit of time right now to look at where leadership is losing its meaning and how we collectively, as a marketing discipline, can inject a little bit of meaning back into the discussion. So, market leadership. If you're in the technology sector, you're probably familiar with Gartner's Magic Quadrant. This is my favorite ever Magic Quadrant. I'm going to wait for a minute for that to sink in. Merlin and Gandalf, I don't know. I got to contest that one in the upper right-hand quadrant. But this is one of the places people go to claim market leadership. I'm upper right in the leaders quadrant. I've got the biggest vision, and my sales are doing the best, and I have convinced Gartner that I'm number one. The reason this has any influence is because somebody we're supposed to trust has published criteria that tell you what that leader is. By the way, if you're in a Magic Quadrant bind right now, I just want to share this little nugget with you. Wonderful quote about the Magic Quadrant: the worst measurement of anything, anytime, anywhere. And that quote comes from Gideon Gartner, inventor of the Magic Quadrant. Also read the fine print. It says, do not use this to make decisions. I'm paraphrasing. But that's because it assumes a certain set of conditions apply. It assumes they know what you want. It assumes they know what you're trying to accomplish with the technology. It makes a lot of assumptions. It is a snapshot for what might be useful to one person. But if I'm looking to entertain my kids at a birthday party, this is not the magic quadrant for me. I don't want Merlin. He's going to scare them. Maybe I actually want Penn and Teller. Purpose determines leadership. So these are some helpful questions that I like to use to blow stuff up. And so these are questions you can ask yourselves before you fall into that leadership trap of market leadership. What criteria of market leadership are we using? Who's going to care about this? Why would they care about it? What's their purpose? And what's the story behind the numbers I'm putting out there? Under what conditions is this useful? You know, one of my favorite questions to ask my clients is, please tell me who should never ever buy your product. Like, I know you think everybody should have it. Who should never, ever buy your product or service? That tells me a lot more about your leadership than anything else, who you're not for. And then lastly, what's the trajectory? You might be leading today, but as you hear every single time anyone gives up and gives a talk like this, the pace of change is accelerating. That might actually overtake leadership at center square at some point, but the pace of change is accelerating. But it's true, being a leader today doesn't mean anything unless you're continuing to learn and evolve. So these are the questions that I ask when I have to blow up market leadership. If you want to put some meaning back into market leadership, before you thump your chest, you might want to actually ask myself, does my revenue, my ranking, my reputation, my customers, and my employee and partners, are they on board with my market leadership story? And if you don't know what those actual verifiable facts tell you, you might want to get curious and find out. Those are the vectors of market leadership that matter. Those are the data points, the evidence you would present to convince the court of public opinion that your story's got any validity to it. Checklists to go through. The next area that's often bastardized is technology leadership. This is a tricky one because in service of what's true and verifiable and tangible, a lot of folks fall back on the speeds and feeds and claiming to be most innovative in what we call the illities, reliability, security, agility, all the illities. Technology leadership is sometimes defined as, I've created a brand new category. Okay, there's no category of one, so I hope you've got some competition, and I hope that you're trying to solve the same problem. These are some of the traps where falling into the same old patterns of technology leadership don't really help you. And so if your responsibility is to tell a technology leadership story, challenge these and lean on these. What does your IP portfolio look like, and how is it being used? Are you investing in R&D? Are you an ingredient play? Who else wins when you win is one of the best questions to ask a technology leadership story. Technology is just a how, it's not a why. Despite the very impressive technology of the Khan Academy, he didn't get up here and describe what I'm sure is an amazing data infrastructure. He said, awesome education should be free to everybody all the time. Right? So technology leadership is, what's your human impact? And if technology is basically the extension of our eyes, our fingers, our brains, how are we impacting human behavior and human potential? That's technology leadership. So ask yourself these questions before you fall into that trap. Team leadership. Kenneth Branagh's King Henry V, one of my favorite ever, because I'm also a Shakespeare geek, and to see it on this big screen was huge. But what a lesson in leadership. And if you don't know the story, it's worth knowing. This is the moment right before King Henry V is about to storm the field at Agincourt. And this is the Feast of St. Crispin's Day speech before they take the battlefield. And gentlemen still abed will, I'm not onto the whole thing, don't worry. But the idea is, this is the rousing leadership speech. This is the motivational speech. And this is all too often the snapshot of leadership that we as marketers and communicators take, the moment before the battle. This is not the defining moment of leadership. This is. When you have shed blood with your people, when you have served a common cause, when you have led from the front, when you've lost as many pints as anybody else has, when you have felt the burden of what you're trying to accomplish, when you're actually leading a team with that team. This moment in the story is when he's just been informed that they've won. This is the portrait of success. And as we're telling stories about leadership, it's a little bit less about the yay, we're awesome, woohoo. It's a little bit more about celebrating the hard work and sacrifice that goes into serving a common cause. This is the defining moment of leadership, which also means you don't have to just talk about every time you won. You talk about all the things you learned when you didn't. The learning curve, the accelerated learning curve, one of the most important aspects of team leadership. So I know that there are those of us in the industry that recommend things like a vision statement or a mission statement. My favorite mission statement now is Weird Al Yankovic's mission statement. That is the best ever. I highly suggest it. If you haven't seen Weird Al Yankovic's mission statement video, please. It's worth it. Every buzzword ever used, strung into song. Love it. But team leadership doesn't have to end up in wordle obscurity. You start with why you exist. Why does the world need us? What is our shared purpose? Know what you're not there to solve. Know what you don't serve. One of the best ways to differentiate your company from another is just to know what you're in service of that they're not, and vice versa. There's room for more than one social network in the world. It's just that some have a purpose that's a little different than others. Coach and co-create your vision. Include folks in the definition of it. And lastly, I just want to call this out. As a leader myself, I'm the CEO of Blanc Otus, but Blanc Otus doesn't work for Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds works for Blanc Otus. We work for each other, and we are in service of each other, and that's the way leaders should work. So when we're talking about leadership and telling leadership stories, I think it's critical that we put meaning back into the term leader. And perhaps nowhere is this more important than in technology and thought leadership. Because thought leadership is where all these ideas get expressed. How many folks here are familiar with Gartner's hype cycle? Okay, for those who aren't, I'll make this easy. We're monkeys. And when we come across new things, we don't always know how to use them. Think Stanley Kubrick in The Bone. Is this a musical instrument? Is it a weapon? Is it a space station? It took me a little while to figure it out, but we got to space station. All technology goes through an adoption cycle while we figure out what it's good for, what it's not, and how to use it. And Gartner has mapped how we adapt to and utilize new technologies along this curve. It starts off in the innovation trigger, something brand new is invented, stuff you haven't heard of yet unless you're really scientific and geeky, and then maybe you have. And so, things like smart dust, things like really interesting transformative stuff is in this phase. Then over time, marketing and PR people get involved and we hype the heck out of it. It reaches what Gartner calls a peak of inflated expectations. In the immortal words of Chevy Chase from SNL, it's a floor wax and a dessert topping. Does everything. Internet of Things, kind of hypey right now. Then folks actually buy it, invest in it, and use it, and they go, oh crud, this does not do what it said on the box. And you hit what Gartner eloquently terms the trough of disillusionment. I would like you to think of that slope as a razor blade during which careers, budgets, and hope are slashed. So you hit rock bottom. This is not what I thought it was. But eventually, wiser heads prevail and learn to adjust their approach, their expectation, or both. And we bounce up, and we hit the slope of enlightenment, oh so modestly termed by Gartner. And we start learning how to use things the right way. 3D scanners are on the slope of enlightenment, I think because they're now coming out with wedding cake toppers that are actually little miniature chocolate versions of you. That's why we're enlightened, that's fine. And then over time, it hits the plateau of productivity. What does this mean for us as thought leaders? This, by the way, is the single most commonly downloaded piece of technology research from the world's largest IT research company. I'm not saying it's true, I'm saying it's popular. So what do? Be the voice of reason. Take a look at this, figure out where you agree and disagree. When things are in the innovation trigger, you should be predicting where these things will and will not disrupt the rest of the world. And you don't have to invent the stuff in that phase. Just know what it's used for and what it's not. Have a point of view on the disruption. When everyone else has jumped on the bandwagon, bust the myths. This is the best time for blowing stuff up. Top 5 questions you should ask yourself before you invest in the Internet of Things. Top 5 things that every CEO should ask their social media manager. Top 5 mistakes you can avoid before you double down on cybersecurity intelligence. Take the hot topics and get folks to think twice. or in the words of Sal Khan, run a mindset intervention. When everyone else has got the hangover from the party, you serve the hangover breakfast and the aspirin. You serve the wait a second, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can salvage this. Here's how we can reset and adjust our approach to recoup our ROI. Here's how to get what you deserve out of your existing investment in this new technology or capability. And while everyone else is figuring it out, celebrate those that did. Please don't say that stuff in this phase is innovative because someone else has gone through a really painful cycle. Celebrate their learnings and their lessons. And if you're being asked to promote speech recognition as innovative, please predict where it's going to be turned on its head because it's kind of, toward the end. This is one example of how to be the voice of reason in a technology discussion. But if you don't want to go that geeky, and you've got a different kind of discussion to have, I would put out to you just a 4-part litmus test. Again, thought leadership, very overused term. I would say, number one, it isn't thought leadership if it doesn't relate to thoughts that already exist. Inventing a new term, that's not thought leadership, that's inventing a new term. It's kind of like having a kid. It takes a long time, it's expensive, and it's not always, going to be what you thought it was. So, I got 3 great kids, love them, and I know we're broadcasting kids, I love you very much. You're awesome, and everything I wanted. Relevant is important. It's the number one criteria. It's got to be something that folks are talking about, but you also need to provide a useful way of looking at it. So the question you ask yourself is, after I read this thought leadership piece, is it going to change my behavior at all? What decisions would it impact? Is it provocative? Does it help me see it in a new way? Does it blow up an old myth? Does it create the space for something new? And lastly, it's inclusive. The person in the party that has all the answers is not always the most interesting. It's the person with all the questions that's the most interesting at the party. And be inclusive. And let others help share their wisdom too. So in terms of that, after we've blown some stuff up, in the closing 8 minutes, I want to go over a model for reconstructing your story once you've oh so lovingly blown it up. And this 5-chapter story model does in fact have its roots in the hero's journey, which is from Joseph Campbell, who got it from Carl Jung, who got it from Ovid's Metamorphosis, and if you're a story geek, please come see me at lunch, we'll go on for a while. But for now, let's just bring it down to 5 chapters. A universal story follows these 5 chapters. It's been proven time and time again. Chapter 1, the world has changed. So I'm going to use the Khan Academy as perhaps an example. The pace of knowledge has outpaced the pace of education. The stuff we need to learn is evolving at a faster pace than our current systems can handle. And the need to learn is now exceeding our ability to learn. Technology has changed, that's creating more knowledge that's out there. And by the way, there are individual, corporate, sector, and national economies that are depending on us to solve this problem. Chapter 2, this creates changes. Chapter 1 made me relevant. Chapter 2 makes me emotionally relevant. This hurts. People that have amazing potential are not living up to that potential. Think of that wonderful lady from Mongolia. Please make more videos. You could see the hunger for more knowledge pulsating there. So there's an individual need, but there's also a corporate need. We need more talent. We need more engineers. We need more capable people. National economies are depending on this. This change creates challenges. It needs to be solved right now. In script writing terms, set the ticking clock. Make this a problem that has to be solved right now. Chapter 3, a shift in thinking, or what I'm now going to start calling the mindset intervention. That's brilliant. What if we saw this differently? What if we defined our problem differently? What if that same technology that creates this educational gap in the world were put to use to solve it? What if, and here I will respectfully offer a different opinion than Sal Khan, we didn't look at it in terms of haves and have-nots? What if we recognized haves and haves? The number one source of untapped computing potential in this world are the undereducated, underprivileged people on this planet. Their brains represent computing power and potential and economic contribution. There are haves and haves, and it's time to get the 2 halves together. By the way, I'm making this up. That's chapter 3, a shift in thinking. Chapter 4, enter the hero. And here you get to pick. Are you the hero? Your customer the hero? Is your vision the hero? Who's the hero? Doesn't have to be you. Perhaps you're the Obi-Wan Kenobi in the story and someone else is the Luke Skywalker. Some choices to make. And then lastly, close with a viral question, an open-ended, genuinely provocative question that keeps the discussion going. So first, pick your world has changed, tech, business, society, environment, law, a checklist of the lenses you can go through. Then look at the challenge that creates. Best articulated as a catch-22, something that's really hard to do that you have to do, caught between a rock and a hard place. A false dilemma makes a great chapter 2. And chapter 2 is a pain that's felt on a different level. This makes you choose a persona. Is it an individual, a function, a company, a society, a nation? Chapter 3 is that shift in thinking, that mindset intervention. And the most powerful what-ifs are the ones that challenge our view of ourselves. I'm going to come back to my own personal mission. There are no have-nots in this world. There are just haves. Access is what's missing. And then chapter 4, enter the hero. It can be you, as the superhero, or it can be your idea, or it can be a combination of someone else equipped with your idea. And then chapter 5, which we'll spend the last 4 minutes on, is the viral question. This is, again, a way to include your audience in the narrative. Chances are, if you've done a decent job with your storytelling, with your thought leadership piece, with your blog post, with your live speech, you've got them intrigued a little bit, and they may have something to offer to the discussion. And all they're missing is that really cool question that unlocks that awesome thing they have waiting to say. So where does that question land? Where does that come from? And these are some of the kinds of questions. Why does this matter to you? What becomes possible for you? Where do you see this in action in the world today? I want to say a word about that real quick. A lot of the companies we work with say, we're changing the world. We're going to change the world. We're going to revolutionize the world. Wow, that is really expensive. But what if there's already change happening in the world and you're participating in it? What if you didn't have to create the wave? What if you just had to surf it? How are you participating in the change? And how will you move forward is another great question. Once they're bought into your vision, crowdsource the end of the story, crowdsource the benefit statement, crowdsource the how do we move forward statement. A time was when we would conduct focus groups and guess. We don't have to do that anymore. That's one of the most powerful things about LinkedIn. No more guessing. Just ask. Kind of cool. So the power of the viral question, here's the data that I promised you. We ran a study, it was 2 years ago, and we're going to refresh it again next quarter. And it is on what drives that positive word of mouth, what drives that engagement. So I know, again, I'm preaching to the converted here. We all know what actually drives. This was in the context, by the way, of B2B tech purchases. There is other research out there for the consumer purchase as well. But we asked 813 purchase decision makers of large B2B tech purchases, why do you buy? What do you do? And all this research is available on our website at blancandOtus.com. We just give this away for free. We think people need to know. So we said, when you're considering a large purchase, how valuable do you find the following sources of information? And as we heard earlier, a combination of industry analysts and word of mouth from peers were tied for the number 2 answer, both in getting you to the table for the RFP and in closing the deal. But very interestingly, what we're seeing on LinkedIn is that the difference between an industry expert and a peer are blurring. Now there are expert peers. And if the two were tied for first place anyway, you know this is a smart place to spend your time, whether you're looking for lead gen or accelerating closure. But then we say, okay, all right, word of mouth, got it. Didn't learn a lot new there. Good to validate. What's going to get you to create some word of mouth? And the exact terms they used were, it poses a thought-provoking question around a timely topic. And when I dug into the actual answers and some of the verbatims, let me paraphrase for you. Ask me a question that makes me look brilliant when I answer it. They would like to look smart too. So make them look smart by asking them the question that needs to be addressed. And to the question that was posed earlier to Catherine, well, what if it's not all positive? What if it doesn't all flow your way? There's so much power in asking the right question, of being the one that convenes your industry on the problem to solve. You don't always have to agree on the way forward. You have to agree on the problem that needs to be addressed. And the number 2 answer here was it features a challenge or problem I am currently facing. So if we are a little curious about their challenges and a little curious around what topics are time of them, you'll know how to craft that viral question. And these are the categories of viral questions I can propose you start with, but just imagine what you could learn by listening to the folks on LinkedIn. The folks you're trying to reach on LinkedIn, there they are in problem-solving mode. Kind of cool. So I will close with this. I know I'm at time. I just want to say a few final words about being in service of something big, because all of this depends on the fact that you believe in what you're doing, that your organization is necessary. And so I want to just draw a distinction between this often used term storytelling and messages, because I'm not a big fan of messages. This is a message. Probably means a lot of different things depending on who's looking at it. Not all messages are clear either. This is a message. What is that? A cow pat? Is that a rock? What is that? It's a message. And 2 messages, I don't really know what you're talking about. If I give you a 3rd message, maybe I can start to see what this is about. I got 3 messages. What's missing is context. And I would put it to you that the single most powerful story of the last millennia was when a species that believed a shining object in the sky to be divine landed on it. It changed poetry, philosophy, religion, science, politics. And for one of the only moments in our species' history, we were all looking at the same images at the same time because we hadn't yet learned how to time shift TV. A truly uniting moment, which is lost if I just put out 3 messages. It's the story that matters. Story is how Sal taught us this morning. Story is what changes behavior. Story is what runs the mental intervention. Story is what matter, especially if they're about things you believe in. So I ask it of you, what's your moonshot? That's my viral question to you. What are you trying to accomplish really? What is your moonshot? What is the story of your moonshot? Who's necessary with you along that journey? And how will you include them in your moonshot? I think a mission statement that does not require the participation of your customers and partners is not all that interesting. Give them something to join. That's my time. I appreciate the invitation from my good friend Mike. Hope you found it useful. And I'll turn it back over to my friend.